We are live, so the rumor has it. Let me double check our streams are going. Always a good thing to do. You can catch us on Twitter at DeSci Peaks, and on YouTube we are using the Science Commons Initiative. YouTube for now, things are great. Thanks for the SCI and DeSci World for helping us kickstart DeSci Peaks in this new year. Woo! What's up, Jelani? You wanna tell the good folks about the little format, what we got going today?
Absolutely. So thanks everybody for joining us. This is our first official monthly episode of DeSci Peaks. We are streaming on a variety of different platforms, as John just said. Definitely thank you to DeSci World and SCI for helping us kind of boost this and put this together. So the format for these kind of conversations for this monthly ongoing series is basically going to be broken down into two partitions. So the first half an hour to 15 minutes, depending on how active the DeSci space is going to be focused on a roundup. So each month we're going to be having one of these episodes. The first half is or the first quarter is going to be looking back on all the events and all the interesting goings-ons in the DeSci space, kind of a state of DeSci address. And we may have some people pop in. Yeah, it's going to be address. We're going to make it somewhat formal, at least in the naming and the branding. But the stream is very much not a formal one, so it's going to be lively, interactive, and fun. And so to that point, actually, for the roundup section, we are encouraging individuals to come on and come and speak with us freely, talk about your experiences over the last month. If there are particular events that you've attended, please feel free to come on and share your experiences with that and your reviewings, your ins and outs, just so that people really understand what's been going on in this space. And so the next portion of it will be more topic driven. So each month there will be a particular topic. In today's episode, we're going to be talking about tokenized IP, and the application, the application of tokenized intellectual property in the scientific realm, the decentralized science realm, and the open science realm, and how that is to impact the industry moving forward. And so in today's episode, we have two pioneering guests, key opinion leaders, Daniel Uribe and Chris Byrnes, that'll be joining us at around 11:30 for that portion of the talk. And then each subsequent episode with their particular topics, we're hoping to get key opinion leaders lined up to help us talk or to give a little bit more of a deeper insight into the particular topic. So I believe next month we will be talking about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the space, and we'll be including a lot of participants that are actively working with that. And then I believe in March we're going to be looking at the interface between ReFi and DeSci, colloquially defined as ReSci, and looking at what kind of opportunities for collaboration and innovation can be brought about by fusing these two realms. So that's what we'll be up to.
Very cool. And if anyone wants to jump on stream, I see a couple people in the green room now. We'll bring you up in just a moment to start some discussions here. But if anyone wants to jump on, you got to go to our Discord server where we have posted a link to the stream. And you can come live on stage for these first 30 minutes before our guests come in. Love to hear from you. So we've got Jim Owens here I'm bringing up. We've got Ray from Health Unchained and someone named Tentom. Hi.
Yeah, this first segment is always going to be a little bit more chaotic, which is exactly what we want it to be. We want to hear from the community and hear about their experiences in the space and what's been going on in their lives. Those that
if you ever lose your footing, just look at my cute, adorable dog and how derpy she is. Oh, come on. Yeah, this is awesome. How do we want to kick this off?
Well, so I think on our end, we can talk about two of the major events in DeSci over the last month, so January usually is slow for both the traditional industry and the Web3 industry. People are coming back from vacation. So I think this is always going to be one of the cooler months. But funny enough, it's been quite active in the DeSci space. So we've had great events like DeSci London, which I think has been the biggest event in the DeSci space so far. And we've also had more financially driven events like the Gitcoin Alpha Round. And I'd love to get the opportunity to speak to a little bit on both of those. John,
I got opinions, man. I got opinions. I'm ready to go.
I know John. So I love that John has opinions on the Gitcoin Alpha Round, which I'll allow him to speak to for sure. And this is, again, with that kind of energy, it's no holds bar. We want the truth. We're here to investigate.
Don't be a dick.
deeper.
That's the only rule. The only rule. Did I just demonetize us? Are you allowed to say dick on YouTube? I don't know.
Don't think so, but it is what it is. Yes, the point is not to be rude, but to be truthful and candid. So.
And really quick, Chris, I do see you in the green room out there. Out of respect to Daniel, I don't want to bring you up on stage before you're both here, just so we respect everyone's time and talking about IP NFTs. But feel free to stick around in the green room until 11:30 when we start that more focused discussion. That said, let's start with DeSci London because that was a really fun one. Did anyone here go?
I did not. I tried to really hard, but tickets are expensive getting from Canada to the UK. But I know Ray was there.
Hey guys, yeah. First of all, thanks for putting this together. Yes, I was there. DeSci London was a fabulous event. Learned a lot. Met a lot of really cool people in the DeSci space, particularly a lot of scientists and researchers. Although there were some investors there as well, and some people like in the patient community space as well. So a lot of learnings there. So if you did miss it, I also recapped it in an article as well on my Substack. So if you guys want to check that out or throw a link to people who might be interested, a lot of links to individuals, companies there. So if you missed it, that could be a good kind of overview.
If you throw that link in the DeSci Peaks Discord server, we will be sure to tweet it out with this video. We'll make a little thread afterwards.
Okay.
That's awesome.
Definitely, I could do that. It was my second time in London. London's great. And, the facility or like where they actually hosted the event, the Francis Crick Institute, so beautiful. I think there's a lot of scientific people in there. It's like a research facility. So there's a lot of people walking through kind of hearing about DeSci. These are just regular researchers that haven't been initiated yet, I guess you can say. And it was just really cool to see all those people interacting with each other. A lot of great talks. I thought the organizers did a fabulous job making sure timing was on time. Everything was smooth.
Do we know who organized it? If we want to give them a shout out really quick for putting this stuff on, it is not easy.
I do have their names actually here.
So it was Alfred Brown and Barat.
Yeah.
So and it was a group out of London too, right? Like a DeSci group that is based out there, I think, is affiliated with it.
Yeah. So DeSci London is its own group.
Okay.
Kind of like DeSci New York that DBDAO has started, and if you like DeSci Berlin as an equivalent. And Alfie is the one who's spearheading that. I'm hoping he'll come in here and kind of regale us with a little bit of his background. They did just do a great roundup with the DeSci Collective on a Twitter Spaces about a couple of hours ago. So for everybody who wants to learn a little bit more about that, they've already had that. So check those out. But Alfie and Barat, in collaboration with a few of the other Web3 DeSci partnership orgs like DeSci World with Joshua and Sarah Hamburg with Phase 3, kind of came together to make this a recurring event in the DeSci London sphere, and I guess in the digital sphere.
This is so cool. This is one thing I love watching develop over the past year and a half, is you've got some scattered events related to blockchain or crypto and science over the past decade, but over the past year and a half, you start to see these larger scale events that are going to be recurring. You got ETH Denver last year, and it's coming back this year. You've got DeSci Boston, you've got Amsterdam, you've got and now London, you've got New York getting their own cohort together. It's a lot of really cool community building and collaboration, and now we've got scientists coming to these things too instead of just like crypto degens. That's great. I love that perspective coming into this space, kind of grounding it all out and taking everyone's heads out of the clouds and putting their feet on the ground a little bit, maybe.
Yeah,
I totally agree. And you mentioned like the audience there wasn't these DeFi degens. You're absolutely right. Many people were very serious about like the impact blockchain could have on their field of interest. And I think that's really great because I'm kind of tired of the DeFi stuff. I think there's been a lot of people kind of pushing it, and I get the value in it. I really do. However, money is just, it comes and goes. I think what's really valuable is like people's health and people's ability to take care of themselves, and then the scientific breakthroughs that we learn as a society by doing this like hardcore research kind of stuff, which doesn't come out of like investments. You can't really invest. You can invest in science, but someone has to actually do that science. So I think that's really Really good.
Yeah, and I do want to make sure I didn't misspeak. I said DeSci degen because there are DeSci
Okay.
degens for sure. But to your point, I think
Misheard you. Sorry.
first, like we cannot overstate the importance of the financial system in the way societies function. Like, it is a critical infrastructure, but it's not like that thing that people see as operating. It's like no one really knows what Swift is or how the banking system props up the entire society, but they can kind of relate to science. You see a rocket go off, and you're like, oh, that's science. You see a new a vaccine come out, you're like, oh, that's science. Like, DeSci is positioned to be a legitimizer to crypto and Web3 overall, and it's scientists themselves are skeptical by nature, and they're going to come in and ask great questions, and they make sure to pop balloons when like heads get too big, and like these ideas are just like kind of lofty ideas with no footing. So it's going to be super valuable to not just DeSci, but DeFi and every other aspect of crypto, refi, all these things, just to have researchers in the space.
Absolutely, and I'd love to hear James's opinion. But one thing I want to say is to Ray's point. I love DeFi. I think DeFi has great utility, and is worthwhile as a rail to facilitate other things, especially in the crowdsourcing perspective.
If it works.
But I went to a conference. I went to a conference yesterday. I spoke as a panel at HEC Montréal, which is one of the major universities here in Montreal. So shout out to them for having me. And it was looking at blockchain implementation in industry, and it was just heavily focused on DeFi and the utility and drivers of blockchain as a currency driver, and not so much the application of distributed ledger technology in different universities. So I think it speaks, or in different industries. I think it speaks to the notion that we're still very early. I mean, within this echo chamber of Web3, it seems like, DeFi, that's old news from like a couple of years ago, right? But it's really not. I think a lot of people, especially the general population that are not really heavily invested on the day-to-day like we are into this space, they're still very new. They're still they're still learning about like what the implementations, what does this mean, regulation. They're very much focused on the financial perspective, and they don't quite understand that this technology can be moved and applied to a variety of different things. And I'm hoping 2023 will be the year of DeSci, where we highlight that example, not just for ourselves, but to incite other industries to start to implement DLT technology and see how we can change the world. But James, I'd love to hear like your opinion.
Well, I'm involved in 3 different major initiatives in the blockchain space, right? So I'm the lead developer for Gridcoin, which is one of the oldest original altcoins, really designed around distributed computing and rewarding people to encourage them to, instead of doing useless hashes, let's do something useful, right? And then I'm also involved in Velocity Network, which is a blockchain initiative around employee and applicant credentials, right? Which also intersects into the health space too, believe it or not. And then the third is the general DeSci world, which I think is very important. Notice none of those really have strong connections to like core financial systems. It's more about value-based, utility-based ecosystems, right? I think in particular in the science world, my vision around this is to sort of reset and restore a more equitable approach to distributing science progress, right? It's about connecting to the community. It's about ensuring that people can get their papers out and reviewed and all that kind of stuff, and sort of sweeping away some of the structures that may be, in my view, actually obstructing the progress of science. And I think blockchain will play an important role in that going forward. But we're also, I think you made a really good point. We're also early on. I mean, everyone thinks, because the hype cycle gets
tomorrow. Let's go.
Everyone, we're ready tomorrow. No. We're at the beginning stages of this still, all of it, right? It's still a great experiment.
Fun. Yeah,
but it's really exciting, and we really do have the chance, John. I think you would agree, to reset the clock and sort of sweep away some of the old structures and start afresh, right? That's what this is really about.
That would be fantastic.
And at the very least, if not, because I do think that there's certain ways for the traditional system. There's certain benefits in the traditional system, right? They serve certain purposes. It's been applied to everything, and so what I believe we're doing, and people have heard me say this multiple times, is we're creating a parallel system. And I think this parallel nature allows people to opt in and out, and we can see which opportunities flourish more in one versus the other. And so that's really what I'm looking forward to see.
I think the other thing we have to watch is there's also people trying to apply blockchain for everything, right?
Exactly.
So that's another crazy thing is that, you know, it becomes fad-like, and then the next thing you know, people are trying to apply it to use cases where it really doesn't make sense. So I mean, you got to be practical about things too, right? So
my favorite coin out there is DentaCoin. It's for dentists. Let's go. It's a blockchain for dentists. There are a lot of really good ones out there. But to your point, that everyone's point that it's very early, like these events like DeSci London and the people that put these things on and help the community coalesce in a location around themes and like share their ideas, meet each other, build groups that will probably, like companies or organizations will probably die out in 5 years, but the networks you build around these in the beginning, in the early days, turn into the products that are like Netscape or like Google, like that turn into the actual infrastructure that we're using in 15 years. So it's so valuable. Can't understate how valuable things like DeSci London are. And also to the fact that we're really early, a lot of these projects need funding, and Gitcoin is running an alpha round for funding some of these early DeSci projects. And before I get hot and heated over this, does anyone else have any thoughts on Gitcoin and what they're doing for their space? Just positivity. I'll start it off with that, I guess. I love what they're doing for the space. It's freaking awesome. Like, bottom line. Anything else I say is rooted in that.
Well, I mean, so first and foremost, I'd like to say exactly to that point that we're new. Oh, they're together. Hey, guys.
And Daniel, I see you in the green room too. I will bring both you and Chris up in just a moment to join the discussions.
Yeah. So what I was saying is, shout out to Ray and Health Unchained, right? So Ray runs a podcast named Health Unchained, and they cover a lot of things in terms of the health and the health industry, and that is not just the DeSci space, right? As a matter of fact, I think he's only recently started to broach into the DeSci space. So I think it's very important that we have initiatives like this that kind of bridge the divide. I think that's what's really going to help push us forward and drive in the capital which we need, which kind of is the concept of DeSci, of the Gitcoin Alpha round, which we will touch upon. But also, again, DeSci London, because Josh and Alfred are here, two of the organizers of DeSci London. I'd love to kind of give them the opportunity to just talk about their experience in terms of planning the event, like building the event. I know they have to go, so they're going to give the very quick one, and they just had a recap with DeSci Collective, so it doesn't have to be as in depth. We just kind of candidly love to hear your guys' experience about how it went, and just any insight into that for future events.
Yeah, sure. I mean, so I'll give a little bit of background about how I experienced it as attending as DeSci World. But I think we'll pass over to Alfie first, who is the founder or co-founder of DeSci London, and he can tell us his piece.
Yeah, sure. Well, thanks for having me, even if it is for a brief amount of time. I think that it's really a testament to the community, how successful it was. So the idea was seeded by Julia from Local Globe, and then from that we organized a couple of meetings with Molecule. They laid foundations for they gave us all of the information that meant that DeSci Berlin was so successful, and from that it gave us this great foundation for us to go out and try and really sort of make some impact with the DeSci event, DeSci London event itself. But yeah, everyone was involved from a bunch of different communities, a bunch of different projects, and all chipping in the amount that they could. And it worked out really well. I kept on joking about, even on the day, how decentralized the organization of the conference actually was, because it's a bunch of different projects working together to make it happen. Everyone chipped in when they could. And I think it was a resounding success in my eyes. And that we're still sort of processing the learnings so that we can take on board what went well and then try and really hone it for what DeSci London has planned next, which as it currently stands is continuing the meetups. We're also speaking from our co-working space today as well, thanks to BackC for facilitating us. And yeah, so essentially it's all about the community, and it just shows the passion that's out there for DeSci.
Yeah,
That's
absolutely.
awesome. Congratulations on the event too, by the way. That's everyone who put work into it. Not an easy thing to do. Holy crap, well done.
Thank you.
Yeah, Josh,
Josh,
you
you
want
wanna-
to?
Yeah, so I'll just sort of briefly touch on what it was like as a project, being there as representing a project. I would say for anyone listening who is in DeSci, this is where you should be as your primary sort of port of call for any sort of like progress or any sort of building that you're doing. You should be at these conferences, telling people what you're doing, finding connections face to face, doing that handshake moment. So invaluable in all aspects of crypto and Web3 or life, I'm sure, but especially in DeSci where it's so early. Getting there, meeting these people face to face. There's still some skepticism around, so having that conversation with someone in present is super important. So for DeSci World in particular, it was really successful. We got a lot of great interest from sort of funding partners in particular, which is fantastic for us. But we also we met Ray for the first time. Ray and I had a nice little jam session, so that was good. It's just again, wonderful conference. Everybody that went thought it was the best one that's been so far, myself included.
Yeah, and sorry, just to add to that, I think what Josh is getting at is something that I kept on mentioning throughout the conference, a bit of a cliche, but it's about these water cooler moments. And that's all of these benefits came from going online, people being able to work from wherever, which has opened up so many opportunities, and it's fantastic in its own shape. And I think it's actually honed where we see the value lying when people interact in real life. And so now we go to these conferences with specific agendas on what we really want to do and really target and focus our energy on what we need to do in real life and the things that we actually enjoy doing more in real life. And so, yeah, these conferences are a great opportunity and meetups to do that.
Absolutely. And something you brought up, Josh, they are super valuable, but they can also be super expensive to go to for some of these newer projects who just have an idea and they're just like a small team of passionate people getting started. And this is where we come back around to Gitcoin grants because we are getting close to the time where we want to bring on our guests and start talking about tokenized intellectual property. And so for anyone who doesn't know, Gitcoin is a quadratic funding system algorithm. I don't know, but they take money in from donors and then they distribute it to projects that write grants through quadratic funding. And you can Google that if you want to learn more about what QF is. And it's a great way for new projects to get funding. And in the past, they have done it in a very centralized sort of platformy way. And they have just shifted to a protocol that I'm not super familiar with yet, but they are doing a alpha round for testing out this protocol. And the SCI is an example of a project that was very successful in the first round. The DeSci grant, I think it was Gitcoin round 15. We made a lot of money and we're into now the alpha round. And with that money, we can help support the space and help support our own mission. So now with this alpha round, they're trying out a bunch of new stuff and it's freaking awesome. There are some things, some qualms I have with it though. But does anyone else want to talk about Gitcoin grants before I go?
No, I mean, given their, it's a new concept. I mean, Gitcoin's been around for a while, but the application of the Gitcoin rounds in terms of project building, I think is relatively new. I think Gitcoin really gave. There was bugs. There's always going to be issues with these new paradigms, but I think their intentions, and at least the intention overall, is there. We need to kind of support. We need to support our own community, and because we are approaching this from a decentralized global perspective, we shouldn't rely traditionally on just VCs and these more, profit-driven or profit-seeking incentives, as traditional markets do, or as traditional organizations do. So I like the idea. I'm very much pro the concept of Gitcoin, but I have not had the experience of running a project off of it. So I'd love to hear your qualms. Joshua and Alfred need to go. So thanks guys for coming on. We'll have you on for another episode in the future, I'm sure.
Sounds fantastic.
Cheers,
Thanks,
guys. Thank you.
All right.
Bye.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what you're saying about Gitcoin. It's a fantastic project, and it's 90% there, and it is an alpha round. So they're testing out this stuff. There's a reason that there are issues with it. Really quickly, I'll just list them off. You can't edit your description once you put it out there. In the previous model, you could. So you could post it and continuously update your grant as things come in. So it's a little frustrating. The passport is very, very strict. We have people who are going through as much identification as they can to get that passport up, and they're like real people with hundreds, if not thousands, of commits on GitHub and followers on Twitter, and they still can't get to the number they need. And that's really it. So there's not much, but those are the two big ones. That would be my feedback to the Gitcoin team, who I love and who are fantastic. And like, I can imagine this thing is a whirlwind to build. So it is an awesome project. I can't wait for it to get out of alpha and into maybe a beta, and then for them to do their first full round with this new protocol that they got going.
Yeah, we should definitely have them up as a conversation, because I think dedicated to Gitcoin and everything that they're building to support the space would be a good topic of conversation, that for people to really understand what's going on there. And the other thing I'd like to pivot off of that is, I think moving forward into the space, looking proactively, prospectively, I would love to see more projects as they start to garner more funding help out other projects in the space. Now, we have certain examples of that. BioXYZ is an incubator from the Molecule family that is helping to launch BioDAOs, select few BioDAOs, and they're opening it up to other participants. But I'd love to kind of see more of those kind of initiatives coming up, us kind of supporting ourselves internally. So we have some of these behemoths that have spearheaded the way. They've gotten VC funding, all that kind of stuff. But I'd love to see it trickle down into the ecosystem. So we have a really collaborative, interdisciplinary aspect, and that is not just within bio, but within space, which is another, or space engineering and space initiatives, which is another big part of DeSci, as well as AI and everything else that's going to come from it. I had a great conversation with a project that's working more in the anthropology space. And getting more anthropology into DeSci, decentralized anthropology, would be great. And I think helping these projects kind of spin up as a collective would be great. And that goes for conferences as well. Having almost a collective, a coalition of DeSci projects that help fund participants traveling to different conferences around the world would be cool. Yeah,
definitely. And for example, the SEI took in some money from the last round, and we're sending some of it back to DeSci. We're helping fund ETH Denver. We're helping organize it, and we really want to push the community building that event and funding travel grants for people who can't come, so those newer projects can get that experience like DeSci London and meet people and have that handshake. We are coming up to 11:30 though. Before we kick everyone out of here and bring on our guests for the next hour, Ray, Jim, I'm curious, do you have anything about tokenized IP that you think we might want to talk about or ask these two experts that we're going to be bringing up here shortly?
Yeah. I'm curious about how we maintain the integrity of the relationship between the actual IP asset and the token. That's a significant problem, quite frankly. That's the root of the whole concern, right? There are various rules and regulations in different countries that can cause those two things to diverge. It sort of strikes at the heart of the whole enterprise. I'd be very interested to understand how we protect the integrity of the tokenized representation of the actual intellectual property. So
yeah, it's a great question. I would totally agree. I would just add that every country has their own standards for patents as well. So how does that all work together? So totally agree with that question.
And the backside of that is, how do we get, the typical problem that we have is getting the regulators to get out of the 50 years ago mentality and join the party, right? Without reacting in sort of a curmudgeonly type way, right? So dragging the regulators along is the backside of this discussion, which I think is also important to cover. So,
awesome. We'll be sure to bring that up. Yeah, go ahead, John.
No, those are two great questions. And if you guys have more questions, and this goes to the audience as well, we are on YouTube with a live chat. We'll be fielding questions and comments from the live chat. So if anything comes to mind, or if we miss these questions or miss any particular questions you think we should ask, just pop it in the chat and we'll
right. I'm going to drop off and just listen on the YouTube. Okay, thanks, guys.
Take it easy, guys. Thanks for coming on.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye. All right, with that, and I will apologize to Wuffy68 from CureCoin, who's also in the green room. We did not get the chance to bring you up. I did not see you. That's my bad. Join us for the next one, and I'll be sure to see you this time. That said, we're going to bring up Chris Byrnes and Daniel. I apologize with your last name, Uribe. I'll let you correct me.
No, it's okay.
Awesome.
Hello, everybody. Hello, Chris. Hello.
Hey, everyone. Great to see you.
Hey, guys.
Welcome.
Thank you so much for coming and joining us today. I know it's difficult sometimes scheduling, cross-continental, cross-time zone events. Daniel, I think you're on Pacific time, so it's early morning for you. And Chris, you're in Spain. It's much later in the day. I'm kind of smack dab in the middle, so I appreciate you guys giving us the time to share your expertise and answer a lot of questions that I think are really needed to be addressed and commented on for the space to really understand what the concept of IP is and how we, see it in the framework of open and decentralized science. So I think to start off, I would love to hear you guys just kind of give your origin stories, how you both kind of got into this space and where you're at and what you're working on right now. Daniel, you can go first, and then Chris, please.
Oh, okay. Thank you very much. So again, thank you very much for the space. Thank you for having me. I was introduced to blockchain in 2014 while attending a program in Singularity University by Peter Diamandis. So he was the vice president of engineering of Google back then. So I've learned in about Bitcoin. I was already a cybersecurity expert, let's say, or professional. And I learned about the decentralization, and I was blown obviously away. Moving the time very fast. In 2017, my son was diagnosed with a rare disease. And so I shifted from using blockchain for fintech, because everybody started there, I think. I started saying, hey, how can we contribute using blockchain technology to protect patients' privacy while participating in the genomic revolution? And then we started in 2018 Genobank with the main idea of using NFTs to tokenize human biosamples and derived data sets as non-fungible tokens. We call these bio NFTs for tracing digital rights, right? So these are very based on GDPR, TCPA. So we basically encode the rules of the regulations on smart contracts and put the owner, the patient in control. So that's very broadly.
Great, Chris, go ahead.
Great. Yeah, amazing. Thanks, Daniel. It's such a pleasure to get to join everyone, and especially to get to chat today. Yeah, my approach into Web3 really comes out of about 10 years worth of kind of experimenting I've been doing with the intellectual property system. So oddly enough, I guess, in terms of, I think, the amount of pioneering thought in the Web3 space, I am very new to it. It wasn't until about a year ago that I first learned about the Molecule IP NFT protocol and got really excited about what tokenization of IP could do in these other kind of projects I was experimenting with, which were largely around the formation of sort of like ethical IP commons. And where that had come from actually was a sort of critical perspective I've kind of held of the IP system ever since I was working in sort of international development projects across South Asia and looking at access to medicines problems, other types of problems with technology transfer that constantly seem to kind of push a lot of negative externalities in the economy generally onto, least developed countries, historically marginalized communities, indigenous peoples, things like this. And as I sort of got interested in IP from that perspective, I went to law school, started litigating patents, understanding how the IP system worked, and then wanting to undo all of this power that it could wield in global supply chains in exchange for corporate accountability and things that I think were really important in sort of modern commerce and trade of IP. So anyways, this somehow brought me into Web3 because the tokenization aspects that can be done, I think can actually help empower creators of IP, scientists in DeSci, working towards common goals to sort of pool IP and make it free, just sort of eliminate IP problems when possible, but combine and sort of common around common ethical principles. And when done there, a community can actually wield its IP to those who don't share those ethics and still commercialize them, but otherwise keep this free-flowing kind of liquidity in IP and hopefully common cause that can help do new things in the IP economy. So as I mentioned it just because it's an odd angle in, and the IP NFT protocols that we're building now at Molecule, and I'm an IP advisor to VitaDAO, SciDAO a lot, in the BioXYZ system. and really am experimenting now with fractions of IP NFTs, these friends protocols, this FAM protocol. We're wanting to use them as sort of fundamental building blocks for Web3 enabled IP commenting. And that's so different from how fractions are typically used from DeFi and the thought of like, these are going to be traded like securities. And so I think there's a lot of interesting things to discuss around how IP NFTs can be used and where assumptions go. But I'll pause there. Just hopefully my approach will help explain how I kind of approach some of the questions that I think will come up.
Yeah, definitely. And I think maybe we could start here with taking a step back and looking at IP for what it is in the traditional world too, before we really dive into this new format of IPs. So I'm just curious of your perspective, your knowledge, if you could share it, behind what IP is, intellectual property, kind of why we have it, and is it beneficial or is it a hindrance to the discovery of new knowledge and the translation of that knowledge into a practical, usable technology in these days? We can start with Chris this time and then go to Daniel.
Yeah, so intellectual property, as I look at it, is really just wielding some right to exclude over some piece of knowledge. That can be done without government interference. That's what we recognize as trade secrets now in the IP economy, but it's also how IP in some way existed before the 17th century or even before Rome, the earliest records we have of like first patent use or something. It's just how sometimes sacred knowledge would be kept or trade secrets from manufacture would be kept. That's one type. And then you have government-backed rights to exclude, copyright, patents, trademarks, those types of things. Trade secrets can be protected by the government if there's espionage, if they're stolen. But generally speaking, I just think about IP as a right to exclude wielded over some knowledge, which really can just be any intangible asset.
Great.
From there, maybe I'll just pause there as a definition. There's a couple parts to the question I could talk about more, but we'd love to hear Daniel's thoughts. Yeah,
definitely, and we'll cycle back to it because there were three parts: the what, why, and does it even help? So Daniel, go ahead.
Thank you very much. So, no, I think that's a good explanation. So for me, it's basically a system or access control system, right, to certain information. IP is a social construct in the human history that obviously have its consequences, like because it's also a discriminatory system. So it discriminates at the end of the day, and that's how you literally choose the public information from the private information. And then in the realm of private information, then you have like exclusivity or confidentiality, and then how you build mechanisms around it. So we are going through the systems that you like hire. Literally, I come from the world where you have heard the message, hey, nobody gets fired from hiring IBM, right? And I brought this information because it say, hey, if you trust on IBM because it's a very centralized, because all the talent is there, your information, your systems will be fine. Now we're going through as a Web3 world where we abstracted all the security, and now we are trying to transfer the discrimination in the good sense system for IP. So who has access to what parts of the information of the world into the decentralized networks, right? Because now the security that IBM provided, like and it was exclusive, now that is abstracted. So now everybody have access to security. So then what's next? Well, the next step is again choosing which information can be accessed by whom. And now obviously the big topic right now is the NFTs, right? It's NFT gated kind of way. But again, IP is, for me, is any valuable information that you want to control access with a list or something like that.
It's interesting. It's an interesting paradoxical terminology where we have exclusionary methodologies that discriminate against individuals, not necessarily in a bad way.
Correct.
Just excludes them. And now we're bringing it into a sphere that is decentralized and theoretically or at least philosophically more open to participants playing. And it's how do you balance these almost diametrically opposed forces in terms of, yeah, we want everyone here, but we also need to implement, or we want to also implement tactics that exclude individuals. And how do you balance that? But we'll get into that point. I think this is a great explanation as to what IP is, especially from a philosophical perspective. Why IP, I think, was kind of built into that. So the premise is to exclude, and it also gives you proprietary rights over these intangible assets that you can then, I guess, really in the macroscopic scale, it is to leverage these for predominantly financial benefit, right? Maybe sometimes to a certain extent reputational benefit, but I can also let you guys kind of talk upon the why, and maybe transition that a lot at the same time into, is it actually needed in all cases? Are there certain cases that it should be, that it's implemented but it's not necessary? And then how do you view that in the context of science? And we're again talking about the traditional legacy system, and then we'll move into the Web3 DeSci perspective. Either one, please.
Yeah, I'd love to comment on this why rationale, because I agree with the characterization that IP today seems to be wielded in the market like any other kind of financial tool, and that there's been a financialization of the economy, and now this IPification of the economy seems to just be following a path of the financialization. But I think it's important, especially from a DeSci perspective, and thinking about what we're trying to do in terms of building whole new economic logics and ecosystems for the creation of science and sort of knowledge production generally, is to look at the underlying assumptions of what justifies IP in TRIPS, and for every member of the World Trade Organization who has to have an IP system at a national level, and which really emerges out of like a U.S. Power, sort of the power the U.S. has wielded over IP and trade agreements, which also in the U.S. is enabled out of this constitutional clause called the Progress Clause, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 8 of the Constitution, which says Congress has the power to essentially create the IP system, but really only to promote the progress of what they say is science and useful arts. And this idea of promoting the progress of science, of knowledge production and useful art, which is what's referred to as patent art, patentable subject matter, really arrives out of this like super European Enlightenment ideal that was popular in the 18th century, and that sort of had this utilitarian idea, sort of Lockean, like, well, if I thought the sweat of the brow of my labor means I need some reward to keep creating these things, and I want to teach it to the public, which is the patent handshake. The patent says, don't keep it a trade secret, make it public, teach us, and we, as the handshake with communities, that we'll give you 20-year right to exclude. This is sort of the idea. But I think we're so far away in the modern IP economy from progress and having us as creators, as authors, inventors, producers of IP, occupying and kind of flexing our ideals and our politics of what it means to make progress. So I think there's a degree with which we can reclaim what, through Web3, through DeSci, kind of reclaim this purpose and bring an IP economy that can be tokenized, which is really just kind of any tokenized system of knowledge exchange, and co-governed by a community in a way that actually, I think embraces that original rationale and justification for why, and also can really help remedy a lot of harms that I think a lot of us see from what happens when IP is just treated, sort of treated in the financialization of it.
Daniel, any thoughts to add there?
Well, yes, more into the philosophical space is that I am a promoter of recognizing the individual's collaboration or marginal contribution by using NFTs. That's why we think that everybody loves the artist NFTs or the visual arts NFTs, the music NFTs, and so on and so forth, because at the end of the day, in my opinion, or the way I'm going to ask the following questions or topics is, that for me is very clear that the NFTs or the blockchain is a ledger to keep everybody's contribution in a more numerical or more accountable and transparent way. The philosophical question that I want to bring, because it creates a lot of noise in this system, is as far as I understand, and we were the other day on Twitter discussing with Chris, I was literally trying to understand and say, hey, Chris, but in the IP NFTs, the main thing is that everybody now is contributing to the IPs, or a specific group, let's say, is decentralized science, right? It's a group of researchers contributing to IP. So it's, for me, the noise that it creates is that the system, as far as I understand, is trying to create like a labor union around a patent, or let's say intellectual capital being poured into something, or the idea of a union, right? It's like an intellectual union. And the problem I see there is that unions were created for workers that did a very commoditized or very common kind of routines, right? Like assembling a machine, like turning bolts, right? It was very, very like discrete kind of work. In the intellectual property, you can have like one single person that could have like one claim in the patent that is the claim, right? And then you can have like 20 other ones that value 0, right? So how can you measure that? How can you really fractionalize that in a fair system? So that's for me creates a lot of noise. And to be honest, for me, as I was telling genuinely to Chris the other day on Twitter, is that creates in my mind more potential conflicts than fixing it. That's one of the main topics for me. And the other one is, if I may just very quickly, obviously we will pause and comment, but the other is, then let's say we solve that problem, right? That there's no conflict among the IP contributors or providers or researchers, right? And then let's say with this new IP, let's say it's a drug, it's a new drug, right? The second centerpiece is, but unfortunately, drugs can also harm people because that's how the biology works, right? Somebody will have an intoxication, and let's knock on wood, right? Nothing, but suddenly somebody dies, right? So again, the other concern that I was telling Chris is, okay, now the second philosophical challenge is that the IP NFTs aspire to capitalize gain for the DAO, but in my opinion, it seems that it's trying also to socialize the potential liabilities. Meaning, while everything is cool, the DAO is capitalizing and happy. But somebody, let's say, dies from the new drug discovery, then everybody is going to be liable. Everybody's going to respond. Everybody's going to be, accountable. So again, is this kind of the things in the new IP NFTs. And that being said, obviously for me is, if you are fractionalizing an NFT, whatever the nature is no longer an NFT. Is you're destroying the non-fungibility of a token. For me, is something that logically doesn't compute in my vision of what an NFT is. And that being said, it's also obviously calling the Security Exchange Commission, because you are trying to sell these fractionalizations of NFTs as an investment. So maybe there are 3 topics. Sorry, I went to all of them, but I think right into the core, and obviously
that's great.
More than open to hear what you wanna.
I would love for Chris, if you just want to go for it.
Wait. So I do want to get into the weeds, because I think that is the crux of what we're going to get at. Dan, you bring up really 3 interesting points, and I know Chris is perfectly suited for this as the legal advisor for Molecule. But just in consideration of the participants listening, not everybody comes from the background of being fully, understanding all of these concepts. So I just wanted to make one little disclaimer, one little interjection of, can we talk about, or can either of you, because Dan, you come from the security realm, and I think that's really important here. What is it actually to tokenize IP? And I will give just a very brief colloquial definition and what is circulating in the space. And that is just tokenization as it relates to Web3 is the generation of a digital twin or a digital representation of a particular asset, right? That's the more colloquial, like soft version. From the data security point, I'm going to read this because I'm not a data security specialist, but tokenization is the process of substituting a sensitive data element with a non-sensitive data element, in this case referred to as a token. And I think that security definition, one, is more in depth and more representation of actually what is behind the concept of tokenization, and is very interesting in terms of removing the sensitivity layer of pertinent information. And since we're talking about science, and this includes medical data and genomics in the case of Daniel, or intellectual property as a whole, the removal of sensitive data, how does that factor in, but I think that's an important part. But I'd love to hear your guys' rendition of what actual tokenization of IP is, and then we can definitely get into the more spicier topics that I'm very much looking to get into.
Yeah, great. I mean, there's I've seen several kind of models out in the market for what is actually happening when they're tokenizing IP. But the ones that I work with, the ones that we use at Molecule, are tokenizing the legal rights over some intellectual property assignment. So something that is really tokenizing essentially an IP assignment clause from a sponsored research agreement. So it's a very specific kind of tokenization that's really just about controlling the sort of legal rights that come with this IP assignment. And that IP assignment could be anything from the right to exclusively license IP that remains owned by a university, or in some instances, it could mean the actual transfer of IP created through some sponsored research agreement over to the control of a DAO, such that they might become legal owners of a patent or something like that. So that's tokenizing IP in this sense is simply that. It's simply tokenizing that legal right.
It's a contract.
It's a contract. Fractionalization is really simply granting a sublicense to the IP that's actually been sort of the legal rights of which have been tokenized. So those legal rights that are assigned over to the sort of parent IP NFT empower the token holder to have full freedom to sublicense.
It's a sublet. If you have an apartment, it's like subletting your apartment, subleasing.
Exactly. And the idea here is to use this basic kind of transfer of legal rights, assignment over the legal rights, tokenize. This token now almost is also like a property deed, like you get with real property. And if you get a property deed, but there's already been some sort of encumbrance on it, some right to some easement, some right for the public to pass through, all these things, it comes with the land. You can't get rid of it later. So we try and use this legal logic, tokenized, then fractionalized into these different, essentially right now, we're trying two different sub-license tokenization schemes, fractionalization schemes, friends and fam, that are organized around different ways in which one can align value among a group, inside DeSci really, to co-develop and experiment with intellectual property that's being generated by the common funding of some agreed upon project, right? So it kind of casts the IP into an IP commons, and it uses a tokenization system to try and enable this commons to function, and to actually increase value on the IP NFT, so that the DAO, which also, in many instances now are legally wrapped, they're legal entities as like a Swiss verein, just as you can sue a U.S. nonprofit, any U.S. corporation, including a nonprofit corporation, you can sue a DAO. Not all of them, but those that choose to have a wrapper, they have to have, they have to comply with the local laws of where they're incorporated. So if there's a capitalization requirement and the DAO is legally wrapped, they'll have the capitalization requirement. The DAO can buy, insurance, things like this. I just mentioned this as an aside because I agree with everything Daniel was saying in terms of concerns that he was raising around what I see as very plausible hypothetical situations. But my take on those is that yes, and we can talk about those specifically because they're really important. But what's more interesting, I think, for me, is that this whole tokenization system is unlocking these other problems are problems that exist independent of tokenizing IP. These are problems that have to do with corporate accountability more generally, limited liability, and sort of equity around negative externalities in supply chains, all types of things. So I agree, and it's important to talk about, but I don't think there's anything inherent in tokenizing IP, in tokenizing these legal rights, as I described it, to essentially just have a tokenized community for the co-governance and co-commercialization of IP. That's unprecedented. And where there is precedent for doing IP commoning, it's never been securitized. It really is open source software or Creative Commons licensing. These are all kind of similar things in the legal world, which people you accept as a permission, as a covenant not to sue, not as really something where you have an expectation of profit from an investment. So that third prong of the Howey test that Daniel mentioned, happy to dive into there as well. All of these things, they're tools. They can all be turned into securities, just like the absurd cases in securities law of Coca-Cola bottles, whiskey bottles, stuff like this. But anyways, yeah, let me pause there because I'm sure Daniel has amazing stuff to.
No. Same. I mean, I'm just obviously the purpose of time because I have time, but I don't know the rest of the participants because we only planned for 30 hours. I mean, obviously, the thing that I want to say first is that independently of what I say, at least I can say for that, the only thing that I really wanted today is to stress the idea that this is the kind of talks, or at least we need to include them, because everything right now, and is fine with me, is party, right? Is chilling, is everybody's happy. I mean, okay, sorry to be kind of the the guy with the gray hair here, but what I'm trying to tell is that I love so much Web3. I've been in Web3 since 2017, 2018. For me, as you were saying, Chris, blockchain, NFTs, and everything are tools. I agree with that. But the reason to bring new tools to the table is because they solve problems that were not able to be solved before. Otherwise, you are literally just pushing them or, forcing them into the system, and they don't really add value. They just create more noise. So just to put an example very quickly, in the healthcare space, the healthcare data is like an IP commons because it's created by the physician. So you can have many physicians. You have the patient, you have the hospital, you have the regulator. So it's very difficult to tokenize healthcare data, right? The very discrete thing where we are dedicated is your genome. That's nobody doubts that the genome information is from the individual. That's very, very clear. So for me as a tool, just to give the example how I think is for a genome, it makes sense to use an NFT because it's a unique digital twin, as Jelani was mentioning, right? Perfect sense. There is people and groups trying to create digital twins for the healthcare information. Well, good luck, because that's a storm of IP from the physicians, from the groups, from the whatever, and so on and so forth. Even the AIs now, right, contributes to a healthcare diagnostic. Is good luck with that. It's going to be super challenging. What I'm trying to tell you is, like, everything you say, I agree, except that when a group of people is contributing to the IP, is super noisy, and we are not solved that. And then if you just assume that is solved and then just fractionalize that, put it into the market,
So just to quickly note on time here, are you guys good to stick around for another 30 minutes?
I can.
Yeah,
Great,
I
let's
can
keep
as well.
going.
Yeah, I mean, we're supposed to be going till 12:30. So
Yeah.
and I have a little bit of time if it does run over, so there's no problem. I do think so. I wanted to say I very much agree with Daniel. That is exactly why John and I co-founded this initiative, this particular initiative. It's great that the space is coalescing in terms of this brotherhood and bonding. And as I like to call it, kumbaya. That's great, and it's great to highlight the great points. But I do agree that there is a lack of critical analysis of the shortcomings and the problems that are arising from this new technology, these new instances. Yes, we have the potential to solve issues in the traditional scientific industry. However, we're also just like with any new technology, we're introducing new problems. There's always a trade-off, and there's not enough people talking about that. And this is why we have this platform, which is less formal, very much candid, and we want to have these tough decisions, these tough conversations in a respectful way and in an open format, so everybody who is participating in the space really understands that there are liabilities or there are shortcomings that come alongside these beneficial technologies that are going to change the world. So that being said, that's great. I agree with Daniel also on the concept of, so in DeFi, there is certain disclaimers of this is not financial advice and your things can go to zero and all that kind of stuff. But I agree that when we talk about things that interface with legalities and legislations, such as the IP NFT, not so much inherently, but what it's applied to. So drug development, medical records, all these things that no longer just touch upon the financial perspective, but also like the FDA regulations and the Food and Drug Administrations and their equivalents across the world. We're not talking about, people are not conceptualizing, or at least talking about the fact that we have to be concerned of, different from DeFi, we have to be concerned of more than just the financial institutions coming at us, but also the health regulatory institutions, the WHO, and other things of equivalent. What I will say, though, is that much of the individuals who I speak to in this space, and I speak to a lot of people, for the most part, they are cognitive, and we don't have the same DeFi ethos of like, let's run away from a regulation. It's more, let's be proactively engaging with, these third parties that regulate, or that at least provide regulation, so that we are better offset. At least individuals who are going to join DAOs that deal within this space, that is one of the critical things you should use when evaluating whether this DAO is going to be successful and whether you should contribute your time and efforts to this. Because if in the end, they're not conceptualizing the limitations, you don't want to be in there. And we don't want to have something like an FTX that is beyond the scope of finance, but deals with individuals' privacy rights, or as a good example, their genetics, or drugs that get developed. And so just a little intersection I wanted to add there. John, did you want to add anything?
Well, no, I think that's a great point. That let's throw that out as a question. So these scientists who are not familiar with this space at all, who are coming in and they see IP NFTs, they see tokenized intellectual property, they see these DAOs who are funding their research, what is the risk to them? And this goes back to what Chris was saying before with DAOs. Shout out to Vermont for being one of the only states in the US with DAO infrastructure legally. But that's the root of the question. What is the risk to these scientists coming in? And do they know the risk when they're getting into research funded by these new funding models that are completely experiments?
Yeah, I mean, there's no legal risk that I can identify. They're just entering into a standard sponsored research agreement like they would with any other entity. Part of the work that goes in the background in getting a lot of the BioDAOs to actually have successful deals is having to work with the tech transfer offices at each of the universities. And those can be, those offices are notoriously difficult to negotiate with because they're accustomed to disputes over intellectual property that are exactly what Daniel's been describing. What happens when you have people working under one common enterprise, a university, who are collaborating on the development of some project such that the intellectual property is going to get shared. In a laboratory, this happens. In a corporation, this happens. In any controlled entity, these types of conflicts arise. But there's nothing about the token, that's been solved for by the entity that's entering, the kind of Web 2 entity or pre-web entity, the university, whatever it may be, by whatever agreements they have going into, that's actually resolved inside of an employment agreement. And then if you're actually building joint ventures, ownership of IP and who should get sort of equitable shares of those rights to the commercial proceeds of the IP are defined in joint venture agreements. These are all things that are contracted through in conventional corporate arrangements all the time. What's interesting with IP NFTs now, though, is that we can actually try and build enough liquidity to start having people trade on the equitable, right, a few percent of the commercial proceeds. They never get to actually own or co-own at the legal sense the IP, because I think for probably reasons maybe Daniel you already know or others know, there's dispute of law across jurisdictions whenever you have joint and collective ownership of IP. So you have to have it in a single entity, and this is exactly why corporations do the exact. This just follows the default path and says, if we need to change something here, let's we can get around to it, but let's begin by having people just kind of accept the off-chain risk, and then tokenization isn't going to change anything for them. It's just going to give them access to a community who's interested in what's been kind of happening with their IP and in developing it. But in terms of risk, they still get to control how much authority of that IP they're giving away, what returns. It's just negotiating a typical SRA in the first place. So I don't know. I'd be curious if others see other risk. Yeah, Daniel.
No, thank you, Chris. I mean, I think you brought when in 2017. Let me tell you a real quick anecdote. I was part of 3 conferences, and the people, the leaders, like let's say Jelani and Jonathan, they were very worried the same way. So I was about to do an ICO. 2017. We had the token. The token was called the telomeres, right? It was the telomere token for Genobank, actually. But they invited an SEC representative, right? I had the privilege to hear from her because it was actually here on Berkeley University. And she was literally approaching to us in an amicable way, say, hey, don't do this because we're going to get after you. Don't do this, and so on and so forth. For me, it was life-saving, and not only for me, for thousands of people that would have invested in my token, and my token most probably will be going down to 0 because whales would have taken advantage, as all the ICOs we have seen there, right? So again, that happened with financial assets. Nobody died, nobody got harmed, right? The only thing that I want to still stress here is that now we are talking about molecules, right? That, I mean, obviously everybody will interpret what the difference thing. Now, for one thing you said very, very quickly, again, the conflicts of people working together into IP. Here's the thing in my mind that makes a lot of noise as well. So a DAO is like, hey, let's come together. Let's be like a nation, right? A small nation, but nation. Then we will convene, we will tokenize, we will do whatever. We have our own rules. Then somebody gets hurt, like financially or whatever. The problem is that they will not abide to the DAO. They will go to the FBI. They will go to the FDA. They will go to the SEC, right? and then everything is broken now because they say, oh, the SEC is going to say, but you didn't never register your security, so I don't have information about this project. And the FDA the same. Oh, this molecule, what are you talking about? You treatment of what? Longevity, what? And then the FBI said everything will be a disaster because people will not abide. They will just present, they will sue the DAO, and if the authorities are not aligned, they will say, hey, this is not good. And that's exactly what I don't want to happen. Or as much as we can avoid it as a community, that'll be perfect. Right?
It
So
sounds like you're
yeah.
sorry to cut you off, but it sounds like you're advocating for more regulation in this space before we start diving deeper into tokenizing intellectual properties. More regulatory clarity, rather.
Not necessarily, and let me explain. Because, like for instance, on January the 31st, I will post the invitation. I'll participating in a roundtable with the USPTO office. I had the privilege to be invited, right? Genobank's invited, and the roundtable is called NFTs and Copyright, right? Because to be super sincere, there are good people thinking the same way we're thinking. They just do not know how to do and how to embrace the new technology, right? They are not kind of the evil guys like working in the FDA and the SEC wanting to regulate. No. Believe me, we need to approach, we need to talk, and we need to stress, hey, these are your problems. As you were saying, Chris, there are a lot of IP transfer problems. Yes. How can we solve them? How can we put these tools? But in the other hand, the officials will say, hey, this is your boundary. If you cross the boundary, you should be very, very careful because I'm going to go after you because this is a social construct that then you're crossing the goodwill for a very gray area that you don't want to be there. And the problem again are disclaimers. And I'm going to say this a lot of times. Disclaimer. In the DeFi world, as Jelani was saying, now the only thing that I literally want is, okay, let's do disclaimers, right? Disclaimers on MetaMask, disclaimers on PancakeSwap, and now you have disclaimers, even if it's a decentralized decentralized exchange, you have disclaimers all over. And I see literally zero disclaimers on DeSci. Nobody has a disclaimer. And that's something that is a red flag all over the community. That's it.
So I just want to say for everybody listening, DeSci Peaks now has disclaimers from the mouth of Chris and Daniel. So now you know, be wary when it comes to this space. One thing I do want to say, and I understand Daniel's point. I want to say Molecule does do a pretty good job in terms of informing participants about what the IP NFT are as a framework. I think there is more, and I'm saying Molecule, but there are instances of IP NFTs, because that was kind of your guys' moniker. The concept of IP NFTs, I've seen it start to be brought up in their own formats in other locations. And I would say to all of these participants who deal in this, do that. Have your disclaimer. So talk about the concept, how it applies, but also have that real ELI 5, explain like I'm 5 disclaimer, or at least resource for people to understand that this is an experiment of sorts. There is the integration of like the legal system and this IP of this NFT system is rough around the edges. And I think we're all trying to figure it out as we go. But that leads to certain caveats and certain liabilities. So that's definitely something to know. I would say, however, that I'm of the opinion that experimentation is good. Dino talked about how, technology should be brought forth to solve a problem. I do also believe that you should, out of curiosity, generate things and see where they fit. Maybe not ram them in to make them fit, which is what the hype cycle does, as it's done with blockchain across the board. But I do think that there is definitely value in experimentation. That's the whole premise of science. And we're all scientists. Everybody's a scientist at the end of the day. So I very much appreciate that. But again, the disclaimers are very much important.
This is a great lead into Jim's question if we want to.
Yeah, so that's actually where I was going to go.
Beautiful.
And I'm gonna hold you both to this without your consent. I would love to have you guys on at one of our future episodes to talk about this, because I do think there's a lot of intricacy when it comes to licensing and intellectual property and what NFTs actually mean to this. And hopefully that'll be after Daniel's talk at that conference that you were invited to give us more insight into what the general world is looking at when it comes, what the regulators are actually looking at. But James had a question in terms of, so we know we have this framework, it kind of sits between, or it merges the concept of NFT tokenization of copyright. But the question is, how do you secure the backing of that copyright? How do you make sure that there's not a divergence, or in traditional DeFi parlance, a depegging of what backs the intellectual property NFT? Because, and especially to the point that there is different jurisdictional legislation when it comes to that. For me as a participant, and I like that you said, Chris, that the individuals don't own the IP NFT. The platform owns the IP NFT, or the decentralized autonomous organization does that. But different jurisdictions have different regulation. And so I don't know if you guys can address that. How do you maintain or prevent this depegging event, or is that even a concern?
Let's go with Chris.
Yeah, so one, I mean, I appreciate all the notes on disclaimers, and Molecule certainly is going to, I mean, you know, there hasn't been any fractionalization yet, right? So we're still talking about something that hasn't happened yet. And yeah, all of the, I mean, I just drafted a huge terms of use, and we have all of these disclaimers, an operator's manual. You probably just saw BioXYZ dropped the BioDAO. There's so much content that at least the Molecule ecosystem is producing now and is launching before any of these protocols are actually implemented, like a fractionalization protocol, or there's any token sales. So I certainly appreciate that. But you know, in terms of answering how that IP NFT can always be backed by the sort of legal backing, what we're doing with the Molecule IP NFT is it's an actual assignment agreement, minting actually from the owner, the one who owns or controls the rights, and the sponsored research agreement is assigning those rights through a legal agreement into a wallet that they own or control, that then gets tokenized at the same time. So there's as much legal language as we can put in something to say that the legal rights are conveyed with the token. And we have some other stuff in there to just kind of make that stick. But that's about as strong as one can get for any type of time when one is staking their IP for, say, equity on a loan, a lien on a loan, you know, whatever it may be. But I also want to just add one thing. I think I disagree with the scope. I think the scope of the problems that we've been talking about that we're trying to solve for are too narrow. And I think if we want to really look at the problems that we should solve for by tokenizing IP, it's with the failure of the IP system itself, which is actually well documented. There isn't much dispute. There's parts of, you know, the economy that like IP production who say, no, the system works. But there's a structural failure in as much as you have over 50% of all patent litigations in the US are brought by patent trolls. You know, there's the cost of doing business for IP risk management is just cost prohibitive for a lot of startups, for anyone participating in any economy with any IP whatsoever. Tokenizing IP and forming IP commons where you flip the rules such that the people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis have as a default permission, and then you chip away at what restrictions you want to provide in order to recoup costs, will flip the whole risk calculus. So you can think about why $63 trillion worth of IP, which is what the WIPO estimates is what IP is worth in the global economy, can be made much more efficient and actually with much more sort of ethics and control by tokenizing IP and using it for risk management inside IP justice more generally. And this is where you also bind people into arbitration with rules that make sense to address questions that are often the ones I think that Daniel's bringing up of how do we handle IP? How do we handle data sovereignty? Those questions, when they even are addressed at law right now, they aren't addressed with reference to any type of real social policy or cultural relevance. No one really cares. No one goes to watch an IP litigation. I've
I
done
love
them.
IP conferences. Let's go. Judge
Yeah,
Judy IP edition.
But when we build a tokenized community that can get involved in co-governance, co-production, co-dispute transformation, and really focused on the ethics that surround the whole purpose that they're creating for together. Most people are creating for an Earth that doesn't have a 25% year-over-year decrease in biodiversity, right? Why don't people put conditions on their IP to say, anytime this thing's commercialized, the permission is only granted so long as the supply chain doesn't contribute to year-over-year, devastation of biodiversity. Something that's simple, but you lock that stuff in, which people have complete voluntary rights to sort of participate in on these, what really amount to individual standardization. So it's regulation, I think, along the lines of what Daniel was describing, but it's done with more freedom than what you get in a centralized environment. Anyways, I derailed things a little bit there, but I wanted to share the problem that I'm interested in solving with this, and I think it also explains, because I respect the idea. You don't bring tools to you don't hit a round peg with a square hammer, whatever the right saying is. But I think what we can solve for is massive here.
Let's go to Daniel and respond to that and the original question about pegging the NFT and all that stuff. So go ahead.
Just one comment, because I think what Chris was describing is very important, because we also exchanged some ideas in Twitter about this. So in that regard, I was saying, hey, Chris, the narrative of what you are saying, I agree 100%, right? That the system is broken or can be fixed or can be improved, right? The problem is that not necessarily the actual schema of the IP NFTs presented solves the narrative or the problem as well. And here's my point. He talked about the patent trolls, and in the IP NFTs, and correct me if I am wrong, at least that's the way I understand it, then the IP will be open sourced, right? In order to no.
Well, it's conditioned. It's like conditioned access that can be permissionless.
No, but in case of I think it's described that in case a patent troll attacks the system, the protocol, or the let's say the custodians of the IP, then the system will, like you were saying,
the springing license, right?
Exactly. Make it open or something like that.
This is one option that's really just integrating Web 2 IP risk management product called the License on Transfer initiative that was born out of Google. Now it's 2,500 plus companies in big tech who want to just de-risk de-risk IP justice. And so they have this springing license commitment. It's pretty much all the giant tech companies we've seen. Some life science are starting to come over, but we haven't had patent troll problems in life science historically in the same way big tech has. We're only about to see it, in my opinion, with digitization of health services. I do a lot of work in the psychedelic space, and that mainstreaming of psychedelics has a lot of opportunities for psychedelic-assisted therapy that's going to be digitized therapeutics. That's going to bring in the trolls because they have software patents that are of much lower quality than you get in life science.
But today, I mean, and this is because it is written. I mean, if you go right now into the IP framework or whatever, it is described that in case a patent troll comes, then the IP will switch to open source or something like that. And
we haven't launched anything. There's a model. There's ideas about it out there, but nothing that is launched has this in
the Medium post or the IP.
Yeah, exactly. In the literature, exactly.
This is literally the core of the topic here today. So what I'm trying to tell you is, like, my question there was, imagine, and Jelani was saying, hey, what are the risks for the researchers in that case? So let's say this is a 2, 3, 4 year research. They have the expectations to patents. They have the expectations to be bought by a big pharma. Let's say like Tyler we have here, he's in the psychedelics kind of framework. So he has expectation of return of investment. Suddenly a patent troll comes, and then suddenly all the IP is open by the protocol. For me, and as I quote myself, that's how you rug the researchers, right? Because now all their IP will no longer be able to be monetized. In my point of view, maybe yes, but again, not I don't want you to go and answer that. I just want to stress that the design is not there yet, and we should keep on talking about this.
Yeah, I think that's misunderstanding how the springing license works. All it says is that should a patent created by it's something that a patent owner would do. So the university, this lab, whoever who's gotten funding might say, for any IP we produce, we want to ensure patent trolls down the road can never monetize this at our expense. So we're going to say if a patent troll ever takes ownership of it and asserts it against anyone else who's made this commitment, you all automatically get a license. We don't want to allow that type of risk of bad IP market behavior down the road happen with our IP. That's the commitment that one is making, and it's one that for market reasons has been made by 2,500 plus companies in the global economy, because it's an ethical commitment that's easy. It doesn't do anything if someone gets sued by a patent troll. This is actually another reason why you really want to be involved in an IP network. These are what defensive patent aggregators are. These are what unified patents. It's a network of people who are going to share resources in order to combat just the bad part of risk in the IP economy. Just want to decrease the cost of doing business. So you buy things like insurance for patent litigation defense expenses, stuff like this. You pool money in order to exhaust risk from areas of the market that seem like they're too high risk. You do stuff to just keep decreasing risk. That's what you can do with an IP NFT network. And all of that, though, again, these are just bringing on board proven new product into Web3 that's been really successful in Web2, but it's not costing anyone any risk really along the way. It's just giving people more opportunities really to kind of pool risk whenever they want to do it. So I think there's a lot of different hypotheticals where things can go awry, and we also, as tools, they go awry in the same way things already go awry. But I'm not sure that it's going to introduce any new problems simply with the idea of IP being tokenized. People can add stuff to that and make those tokens problems, but I don't think that fundamental assignment of just saying the sort of legal ownership of this right is now in token form, that's just going to make every transaction more efficient, but at the level of IP justice or something, not something that's, I don't know, creating harm.
Before we go forward here, I just want to do a time check. We did schedule to 12:30. Are you guys good for another 15 minutes, or do you have to jump?
I'm okay.
Yeah, I'm good.
So wait, I wanted to just interject here. I think these are fantastic conversations from two ends of the spectrum, and I really wanted to just reiterate, and I do want to go back into this further, but I wanted to reiterate something that Chris said, which was something that I didn't think about, was still fun, like very much profound. And it's not so much what can tokenized IP do for the application of tokenized IP as it stands within science and other disciplines, but it's also what can tokenization of IP do for the IP framework, and how does it change the total macroscopic IP framework? And I think that's a really important discussion and an important thing to focus on, because to Daniel's point, and Chris kind of touched upon this, we're trying to operate within a system that maybe not necessarily for us and can't really account for the things that we're trying to move forward. It's similar to when we spoke with James earlier in terms of science. DeSci is trying to create a parallel system because open science could not operate within this profit over purpose driven system that previously exists. This is a perfect example of that. The reason why open science didn't fail, but it didn't take off to the same extent or to its optimal format, is because it's bound within a system that doesn't want it. So we're creating a system that wants it. Is this the same kind of thing that we're going to see for IP, at least in this case, because we're talking about IP? Is this going to drive innovation in the IP framework, in the legislation that surrounds IP? And of course, there's always going to be resistance. There's always going to be, as James put it, curmudgeonly regulators who don't want the system to change and all this kind of stuff. But that doesn't mean the system shouldn't change. And I think Chris is really talking to the fact that there are existing problems here. And I think they're going to be exacerbated by this concept of Web3 and decentralization. But I think what that'll do is create a full circle where that leads to new legislation that accounts for this, that may ultimately better the framework of IP. So I just wanted to highlight that point. Chris is bringing up really interesting points to that. But we can go back to the in-depth. I know you wanted to rebuttal or at least comment on Chris's points of this commonality, this kind of defense mechanism, this IP commons that the DAOs represent.
No, but very quickly, just I totally agree with what you said, Jelani. But this is again, Chris, to your point, brother, because this is very important. I just went directly to the beta DAOs and I just posted, and the text says literally, right, friends, terms, their license revoked. If an unethical actor, such as a patent troll, tries to capitalize on the IP as a weapon, the IP automatically flips to open source. So it's there, right? Because I read it yesterday. So again, is not interpretation, is not a is there, is written, please correct it. Please.
Oh, no, it's true. And right on that friends framework, that's what's written. Absolutely. My point is that the protocol isn't even available. I mean, one can work with this stuff themselves. When we launch it, we're going to have a lot more info, and you'll be able to see the license that gets launched with the protocol, with all the disclaimers and better explainers. And so you're right. I'm talking about it in a way of like, oh yeah, we're on version 2 yet and haven't published. And you're saying, well, this is the only thing I've seen that's public. And you're completely right. Yep. And apologies if my sense of this was like, oh no, this other thing that I'm thinking of is about to get published. Of course,
that's good. I mean,
yeah. So this is exactly why we need to have these conversations, because similarly to when we talked about what is tokenization, I think as professionals in this space, we take for granted these like concepts that are like, yeah, of course, like IP, Web3, NFT, legal advisory. And we sometimes forget that we're talking about a new space with new entrants that are often not qualified. I think the first participants in the DeSci space, counterintuitively, are not actually going to be the scientists. It's going to be the speculators. It's going to be the citizen scientists that think that this might facilitate their hobbying and all that kind of stuff. And they may not have the fully understanding to be like, okay, let me look into what it actually means that if this IP turns open source, what the implications of that is. So I think we do, and I very much appreciate Daniel bringing this up. And Chris, I know you are aware of it because you've just mentioned of it. But for the general audience, one, make sure you understand what you're getting into. And two, projects, please be very diligent with the message and the resources and your intentions that you're moving forward. People can't read minds. They can only read the words that you write out. So be very intentional with what you write out and be comprehensive. If it means that at the front you put like an ELI 5 version, but then in your white papers and what you have a much more detailed one, it's better to have that one to protect yourselves as entities against regulation, to show that you've done your due diligence and your representation to the public. But it also opens it up for people who are doing their own due diligence to fully grasp what they're getting involved in. DeSci is not DeFi. There's nothing wrong with DeFi, but DeSci has a little bit more at stake with what we're generating, the impact that we're having on this planet. For whatever purposes that is. So just please, projects, keep that in mind.
Just for clarity purpose, sorry to interrupt, because I want to also share how, in my opinion, Web3 and the tokenization in my cosmovision really solves a problem. It's going to take me hopefully 1 minute. So again, I've been with a lot of GDPR regulations. This is for data privacy laws, right? One of the main problems is how you prove consent, right? And the problem today is that consent files, even if it's written or digital or whatever, is today, in 99% of the cases, centralized with the entity that is literally receiving the consent, right? So I am as a company, as a pharma company, I am in a conflict or a potential conflict of interest because I can literally alter potentially that consent to make it more broader or whatever, right? So again, that's why we thought about the consent NFT, because it has to be in a neutral, immutable version, so neither of the parties can alter that for the forever and ever, right? Let's say. So that's one of the key aspects. So even the GDPR regulators have congratulated us, like saying, hey, you are changing, right, the consent kind of siloed way to an open public force, right? Which is good, because GDPR was born to represent the interest of the data subjects, the data owners, right? Say, okay, that is aligned with us. It empowers more. It's a good tool. At least that's how 3 years after we propose it is the narrative, let's say in the future. That's one thing. The second thing I want to bring really quick is about the decentralized storage systems, right? So I talked to a lot of regulations. So, hey, why if, like this is a very known project in the DeSci, Bacalhau project, right? Like WeChain. What if we can create a repository where I can literally hire a data processor, compute over my own data without disclosing it, without sharing it with a future custodian, and just getting my report, get served, receive a service, and then just pay. Literally, a GDPR official back in Brussels, right? This is a very high GDPR representative said, well, if you really do that, GDPR is no longer necessary.
That sounds music to my ear.
That is the mission of Web3.
Yes.
To become more transparent, to become better than the systems that we have. And not create gray areas, not create uncertainty, not to create, So that's what you want to hear from the regulator, because now it's checkmate for them. Say, hey, now what are you going to do if I already protecting the data subject, already grant him ownership, is portable, right to edit, right to own their data, right to consent, right to choose who to access, and so on and so forth. So I'm complying with your law and more, right?
So this brings to mind a question that has been eating at my mind for like 10 years at this point, and you guys are the perfect people to ask it. So I think I absolutely agree with you. The point of Web3 is to get rid of these old systems that, as Chris said, don't work anymore. They've hit the wall. Like IP has hit the wall. And this also goes to what Jelani is thinking about. There's either two options here. The IP NFTs or IP tokenization of IP infrastructure is going to change the legal structure behind it all. That sounds very messy and very difficult. Or we're going to build a new system that replaces IP altogether. So is there anything in your mind, any implementation or any experimentation with this technology that you can envision where the final outcome is there is no more IP? It's not a concept. Just like with Bacalhau, there might not be any more GDPR. It might not be a concept anymore because we don't need it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to jump in there. I don't think, like I mentioned, it's IP now is 63 trillion on the books of the Fortune 500 in the global economy. To have IP as a legal construct disappear, it's a revolutionary. Like so many things, I think would have to
have banks disappear too is pretty revolutionary.
Exactly, and so sure, but I think how we get there is through private contract networks. I don't think everything that we're doing in using DLT as a licensing ledger, which honestly I think is having a secured, validated sort of IP license or agreement of exchange of knowledge is really a legal primitive for the type of data protection that I think Daniel was just describing. So, Daniel, I'd argue that I think we're on the same page in terms of the really valuable use case of DLT with IP, and doing this through IP licensing, I think allows for the freedom of private contract, which has been the layer upon which the majority of businesses is sort of done in the global economy now through terms and conditions. Every time we sign something, we're signing everything over to arbitration all the time. And if we'd use private law to then kind of do what completely transform the way in which we interact with IP, we can create a whole new culture around what IP is and how we should operate with it, and actually immediately be able to enforce that through a private contract sort of agreement system. That's, I think, the way to ultimately transforming abolishing IP perhaps altogether. But it's going to have to, because IP, like we've all acknowledged, is just a cultural consensus. It's just, a right to exclude over an intangible non-rival good is absurd, really. And so if we change culture around it, though, then we'll have fundamentally changed what it means to still have these legal primitives that are backed violently by nation states, right? I mean, backed violently by them.
What about network states? Sorry, that's a joke comment, but yeah, states, let's go.
So in the interest of people's time and all of that, I think we've had really great conversations. I think we've brought up a lot of great things. Daniel's last point in terms of the application of NFT to a variety of data privacy or just data management as a whole, actually, in my opinion, extends beyond the concept of IP. And so we are going to have these conversations in terms of medical privacy as it relates to other aspects. Again, DeSci is right now, DeSci is heavily focused on the biomedical sphere, at least our corner of DeSci is. But application of IP in a variety of different disciplines will have different rules, or at least need different kind of regulations and considerations. So I just wanted to say that. And I think the one thing that I've come to understand in talking to you both is that NFTs inherently are the Web3 version of an IP. And NFTs are almost like you're layering an IP on top of an IP. And that's an interesting paradigm as it relates to, again, the traditional legacy IP framework, right? And I think, the complete understanding of these intricate moving parts, can't just say IP NFT. There's a whole slew of words that come in that. Same way that there's a whole slew of concepts, I should say, that come with bio NFTs and the various applications of those. And we will be exploring those on future episodes of DeSci Peak. So Chris and Daniel, you guys are both more than welcome to come back on at your discretion. I will be reaching out to you all as specific guests, formalized guests as well. I think the wealth of knowledge that you both have as it comes to not just the niche IP, but the concepts, how we translate and how we integrate with the traditional system is invaluable for people understanding the potential of the space, both from the regulatory perspective, but also the innovation that it can drive in both science as well as whatever is attached to on the back end. So that being said, is there any final comments, John? Did you have a question you wanted to add before?
Well, I would love to hear a final comment from everyone. And Daniel, if you do have an idea about how we can transcend IP, feel free to throw it in.
Well, I have an example, and give this to my kids. So if we succeed, because I explain IP NFTs in my Apple box, right? The Apple box is what we have, but it's a centralized IP token box, right? So you can purchase somebody else's IP, which is movies and whatever content, and literally in that box, you receive the token. It's a purchase for literally see the content forever or permanent, or you have a rental, right? But it's literally an IP token. The way I see we succeed is the way that in the future, if we win the Apples of the world, we will have an open box so we can have IP content there, so we can enjoy whatever content that is decentralized, right? Where obviously the box is just a construct, right? We just see the box for obtaining the licensed IP. So don't get me wrong, IP NFTs will exist. We need IP NFTs. The only thing is that I just want to be these voice, or hopefully one of the voices that says, hey, we are not there yet. Because again, I've seen like three pitches from other companies, very young people saying, and I will use IP NFTs to fractionalize the ownership. And I said, what? Wait a second. IP NFTs are not there yet. You're going into the SEC regulation right away, and so on and so forth. So that's literally my concern here. And thank you, Chris, for the time, and thank you for being open to discuss this. I admire what you're doing, but again, we are a big family, right? And I want this to progress in the good way. But again, is that we are going to succeed if we literally take control of these siloed IP or IP managers like Apple, like Google, and so on and so forth, and then we create like an open network of IP that can be consumed without any potential risk. So that being said, thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. And
Thank you,
I
Daniel.
just want to say that it's true. So Molecule has done great things with bringing forth the concept of IP NFT, not only within this space, but outside. Just like with Daniel, I speak to so many projects that are touting this concept of IP NFT and are implementing it in different ways. And it always makes me question, do you fully understand what that means? Because I don't even understand what that means. And I'm talking to specialists in the space, and they're saying that, just be careful with that, right? And I go to DeFi and other Web3 conferences, and those people who are tangentially aware of DeSci always make reference to the IP NFT. Your guys' and I'm specifically to Molecule, you guys' PR engine is extremely strong. And it's been great in pushing the space forward, and I absolutely appreciate that. Period. Finish that statement. But there's also the concept of people are going to take that and not do the due diligence and not really understand and maybe get themselves in hot trouble. And that's not necessarily your fault or in your responsibility, but with great power comes great responsibility. So that being said, Chris, if you have any final words, please feel free.
No, yeah, it's such a pleasure to join. I think when we roll out these licensing primitives and explain how much we're stripping these things down to the studs for all the reasons of disclaimer that need to be out there, I think we'll be addressing and on the same page with where I think all this will go. And so I definitely appreciate the thinking there. And after, more of the protocol that I'm working on launches, if we can talk again, because the feedback is really helpful. And I'm heartened because, Daniel, I think everything you were just describing with the Apple box is the system that we're optimizing for immediately. And it's by, again, using these legal primitives as just IP licenses with certain means of developing IP inside an IP commons, but being really conservative. It pushes risk onto the people playing with those Legos. And we can, I think, be clear about where that risk begins so people, understand and have the right disclaimers. But I think that I share your rationale for why there's a way to set this up where the regulatory regime just isn't going to care. The most they'll care is from an antitrust perspective. And that's also solvable for, there's precedent out there that just can plug into an already existing IP economy where securities understands how to interact. And fortunately, we have very good precedent in just having room to play in the space because securities has never come in and tried to grab an IP license in the way these things function. They're just permissions. They're really just utilities, really, when tokenized. But all that to say, really love what GenoBank is doing. I really appreciate the pushback on hypotheticals. I hope people recognize those are important to talk about. And when stuff's out there, it's everything's being cooked as we all speak. So it's just a great opportunity for, I think, there to be collaborative, honest, keep everyone to account, Daniel, for the reasons you're describing. All this affects the whole ecosystem, but appreciate getting to do so. And Jelani, I'd love to talk to at some point about some IP NFT physics or IP physics that I think we should be bringing in to start talking about language and how all these different little pieces work. And we could do that on another show. I have some thoughts.
Listen, so this is a broadcast to everybody in the space. This is exactly why we started this initiative. This is open to all. We have topics that we're going to bring up, and we have them lined up, like I said before. But the space is more than welcome to help us build out this platform, this DeSci Speaks, this DeSci Peaks, DeSci focused media platform. We're welcoming. We want to hear from the community. We want individuals to propose questions. So if either you individually or together want to ever come back on or spearhead, have us have this conversation again with something else, always feel free to reach out. My DMs are open to everybody. I'm always looking forward to learning more within the space and helping others learn more within the space. So that's what we're here for. John, is there anything you want to add before we close out?
Just that it was an absolute pleasure having you two. It's a wealth of knowledge around IP NFTs that's just Oh man, I'm sure people are gonna love this. The candid feedback, the back and forth. Like this is exactly what we need in the space, and it was just, I loved it. Thank you guys so much for coming.
Thanks, you guys. And
Thank you.
one last thing. This platform is project agnostic, topic driven. So it doesn't matter what project you're affiliated to. We will scrutinize you regardless, internal to ourselves. But we'd also like to have you on to share whatever your perspectives are. So with that, everybody, thank you for participating and coming on our first episode. I'm very excited with what we're going to be doing in the future with all the great innovation and concepts and change and revolution that is going to come from this space. I think it's going to be a bumpy road. For science, it's going to be a bumpy road, but it's hopefully going to be an uphill bumpy road. And that doesn't mean there won't be divots. But I think as long as we come together and have these open discussions, it'll help us move forward in getting past these trials and tribulations, and to do it collaboratively. Because to Chris's point, having a commons, having a grouping of individuals is much more powerful than having individual people or organizations try to push an agenda forward. And I think we're all here for more or less the right reasons. So with that said, again, thank you everybody. And that's it. This is our first episode. We'll see you next month for our next episode on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And feel free to reach out.
Just some clarity there. We don't know when the day is. It's going to be sometimes towards the end of... So, okay.